Wilson is online today. Will give a verbal report on the requested revisions, and we have attachments that are in your package. Letter from City of Nelson and other methodology in previous reports. Open the floor to you first, Amy. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Through the chair. So this item came with a letter from the City of Nelson, and as you can see in the attachments, the city first sent a letter to our regional district in 2019. We newly were in the process of onboarding the Recycle BC program for the beginning of or mid 2020. So we needed a bit of time to get the program settled and collect data, and the way that we were doing our surveying changed because of some program changes with Recycle BC. So in 2023, we collected data and did an assessment, and that is in the City of Nelson attached the first page of that report from October 2023. We presented that to the committee. In the end, it was discussed that it was relatively equitable, and we had no further action on that. So the letter from the City of Nelson shows their discussion about, or ongoing discussion about this. Essentially, there's a bit of a difference of opinion on how to calculate the costs of the depots. The regional district has been calculated largely based on traffic, and the city would like to consider assessing it by the tonnage. And we do understand why the city would like to look at tonnages used by us and by RBC to tally up all the diversion and for the incentives. However, because Recycle BC pays for most, if not all, of the costs that apply to tonnage, all the hauling costs and the processing and various things, the costs of the depot are largely dependent on traffic. And we ran this we ran this by some other regional district colleagues who agreed with that approach. And further, I feel like it is further demonstrated by that working group that I was participating in last year with Recycle BC, where it was essentially recognized that the sort of the approach of looking at costs, because we ended up doing Recycle BC set up a new pricing structure so that low tonnage depots have a higher incentive rate than the high tonnage depots. And that was kind of looking at that there's fixed costs with running the depot, such as staffing, rent, maintenance, that are really not dependent on tonnage. They're more dependent on traffic and or the essential piece of requiring a depot in the first place. So the city has presented some new calculations that land sort of an overpayment of around $100,000 a year. Staff has gone through and revised that, and in the attachments you can see some calculations based on tonnage versus traffic, and the depending on how you look at it, and I'll let Heidi walk through the data a little bit. How you look at it, it's much closer to either potentially a bit of an overpayment or around $30,000 to $15,000, or actually them underfunding the system. And one of the things to look at in this situation is, regardless of where we land, staff feels it's quite equitable still. Since this assessment was done in 2023, we had new incentive rates starting in January 2025, which greatly increased the incentives we get from Recycle BC. So that all of this would need to be revised quite a bit with those new numbers. And then the assessment was done back in 2023, and that the survey that we collected was based on traffic. So we collected data on the rural versus urban users and whether or not those urban users were bringing curbside eligible materials or not. So even the data, the percentage that we're using in all these calculations is based on traffic. So having tonnage at the depot, measuring by tonnage at the depot would be very complicated to split urban versus rural users. Everything goes into the same bins and it's weighed together. Setting up a depot to collect material separated would be a pretty big exercise. Or we're applying traffic users to that tonnage, and one person could bring one bag and one person could bring 8. So there's quite a bit of variation. Heidi, did you want to walk through the calculations a little bit just to explain what the different attachments are?
Yeah, I can do that. So sorry, I'm not sure what the attachments are numbered in the actual agenda because I didn't prep for that. But the one that I have labeled as Nelson's calculations, which is our first attachment that we attached to it, basically was just taking the method that the city of Nelson used, so the tonnage method, and we had data to add to that. Because we didn't do the calculations based on tonnage, when they came back with calculations based on tonnage, we added the ICI tonnage data because that's applicable for that site as well. And we did have a meeting with the city of Nelson to discuss that. And we both agreed that that made sense. And so that attachment with Nelson's calculations shows what the final contribution or over contribution would be, including that ICI adjustment. That value came out to, depending on how you calculate the RBC incentive, it was 36,000 to 19,000. So pretty much what we had reported in that 2023 committee report, not really much different. What we did in the second attachment was what I called a blended calculation. And so we applied the survey data by tonnage where that made sense. So for hauling and for Recycle BC incentives, tonnage would be the most accurate place to apply that, or to apply allocations by tonnage. Whereas for the rest of the things, like the overhead, staffing, property O&M, property lease O&M, those ones still, we feel that site traffic is what impacts those costs the most. And so we did a blended method where we did the City of Nelson's tonnage calculation for the hauling and the Recycle BC incentive, but we stuck with the site traffic calculations for the other parts of this. And that one actually resulted in an under contribution of ranging from 22,000 to almost 40,000. Yeah, if there are any questions, I can try to answer those.
So, thank you. Questions from the committee? I guess one thing I'll point to is the ask from the city of Nelson to go back to the policy. What am I have here? There is a board resolution in 2019 to develop a policy to address fees and taxation for those communities providing their own recycling services. So that would be Blue Box. Now, we hope if we had a policy on that, we would have full disclosure of the benefits, financial and impacts of being part of Blue Box as compared to those of us who aren't. But I guess initially, either on the calculations that we've seen, any questions for staff or discussion in general on the topic? Not seeing any. So maybe I'll ask staff, if we were to have a policy developed, is it fair to say we need to look at the full picture? How does Blue Box benefit one participant versus others? Is it cost effective to look at scrutinize more carefully tonnage versus other methods of apportionment? When one analysis says, well, it could be this much over, and the other analysis says exact opposite, this much under. Just your thoughts on the level of effort and what kind of outcome we would get.
I don't know if it's through the chair specifically answering your questions. The concerns from staff level are multiple. One is the effort required to calculate and recalibrate these methods, no matter which method we are using year after year. So Amy pointed out, anytime RBC changes their reimbursement method, we have to recalibrate. We have to calculate out the specifics to each depot, because depending on tonnage received at the depot, the reimbursements we receive from RBC are different and would be different with or without the city's contribution. We have to calibrate the cost that we have with models and have to determine still the continuation of that. the acceptance of curbside materials at our Groman Depot from the curbside collection from the city of Nelson. So currently we have a compactor, end-of-life compactor at the retaining wall there. We are preparing the bins, switch the bins, and then the bins are hauled largely at our cost from Groman to Fruitvale to the GFL facility there. So we pay GFL for the hauling. So that's worked into the model. But again, that's one of the factors we would have to ongoingly calibrate. The other concern or consideration when we talk about reimbursing the city is that the city indeed for their curbside program does receive RBC funds that pay for or meant to pay for both for the curbside collection, the transportation of the materials to the final destination of marshalling the recycling materials, as well as the supporting depot infrastructure required to make it a complete program that's delivered by us. So there's various considerations when we are talking about we should reimburse the city for the services that they are we should calculate the benefits we receive from the city hosting the curbside program. I think we can't neglect that is largely or fully paid through RBC funds that are retrieved from all consumers paying with the purchase of their product. I don't know if that answers your question, Chair, but
Bart, I guess.
Through the
Or
chair,
go
can
ahead.
I?
Oh, to elaborate, go ahead. Yes, you
Yeah,
go ahead.
thank you. I guess as staff, one of the things we discussed is that the city's letter asks us to do a review and based on that review, develop a policy. So when staff goes through this review, we feel like this is a very equitable program for Nelson. And, you know, the waste service that the recycling service sits within is a shared service. City of Nelson has very high level of service. They've got 2 depots open more than anywhere else. You know, they have access year-round to a hazardous waste depot that the entire subregion funds. And so essentially, and we need this, the residents need a depot for the non-curbside materials. So essentially staff feels like we've done this exercise a number of times. We feel it's equitable and we're ready to move on and continue providing the service and don't really feel like it needs further assessment. Further assessment is going to take a lot of, there's a function within this service really built to pay the city of Nelson back. That's not part of the bylaw that we're running these services from. So that I guess it's a can of worms that gets complicated, in our opinion.
Okay, maybe before going to speakers, though, we have a request and we've heard a verbal report with additional verbal comments. I think as a minimum, our partner at City of Nelson should receive that verbal information we just received by letter or something in point form and return to the city. And I'm remiss in welcoming our future, you're going to be, Jesse, our future Joint Resource Recovery rep. Tomorrow we'll see, we're going to change over. That I think the Nelson Council needs to see something in writing. Whether it's here's where we're at today, and this may then come back to us after I guess next month Councilor Woodward will be at the table. Is that reasonable to capture this conversation in some kind of a response letter, which may be a direction to staff after we go through the speakers? So going through speakers, Watson, Page, to start with, please go ahead.
Well, thank you. My apologies, I didn't think I was first on the list.
I think so.
Okay, I'll take it. Thank you. I would move that what I would like to comment on, and then a question through to staff is it's a very difficult service to offer because we have so many variable levels of servicing depending on where you live. But every participant in the service, including the City of Nelson, including someone who lives on Duncan Island Estates is paying 39 cents a thousand for that service, regardless of what service level you are receiving, whether it's 5 days a week plus a household hazardous waste 5 days a week, or 1 day a week with a transfer station and very limited recycling. Same rate, no matter what. My question through to staff is that when we look at disparity in servicing, when we look at equitability and servicing from a financial perspective, I think it behooves us to include the disparity in servicing level. And we either are under one service in terms of, and I'm only going to suggest this, I'm not going to make this motion, that we acquire all contracts for recycling within the central subregion so that everybody's got the same rebates, everybody's paying the same price, everybody's a part of the same system, because essentially we are the same system. I just went to Groman. Or we get into this piecemeal process, which actually created the allocation services, which financially are creating a lot of questions around why do we have so many different services? That's because we had actually directed staff to create an allocation service so we could identify recycling fees. So we're going to overly complicate that even further. So do I have a question with staff? My question to staff is, well, first to the City of Nelson, I understand the need to look for equitability. That's what we do for our residents all the time. You pay the same rate as someone in Meadow Creek that has 1 day a week of service. So I would say you actually get significant servicing for the same rate. That being said, if staff moves forward with any kind of response back, and if we move forward with any kind of assessment, including the fact that we actually pay the hauling on the curbside pickup for all municipalities, how complicated would it be to include the equitability on servicing and not just the financial end? Is that clear?
So, yeah, service level plus the money side.
I guess you get into the same issue through the chair into the same issue as we are already discussing in regards to the financial equitability. There is so many ways you can calculate that, so many things you can consider in trying to determine what is equitable. If you bring the service level in, then it gets even, for that nuance, even more complicated. Now, do we go and evaluate by hours of accessibility, as you mentioned? So what value do we put behind having 40 hours access versus 8 hours access to a recycling or transfer station site? What value do we put at having a full slate of services versus just a satellite recycling facility that doesn't allow you to bring certain materials and you have to go another hour to the next depot that actually accepts it? So you will always have these subjective parameters that you need to come to a common denominator or make assumptions when you calculate something and look for equitability. I strongly believe we need to forego equitability altogether. I take the example of myself versus my neighbor 5 doors down that lives on the lake. His assessment value of the property is 4 times of my assessment value. That person pays 4 times as much for waste management. Does he get any different services? Does he produce more waste? Likely not. Equitability is simply not there and is never going to be achieved unless you can tell us the exact criteria year after year that you want us to apply to calculate that equitability. That's the problem we are dealing with, both on service levels, which makes it even more complicated, or simply just on a financial level. If we talk about equitability towards the City of Nelson, do we need to talk equitability towards the village of Kaslo, village of Nakusp, city of Castlegar, city of town of Creston, that all have as well curbside programs. Yeah. They have curbside programs that are not including the compaction and transportation component. Maybe Kaslo down the road, that's still a part of the discussion. So we can get totally lost in creating assumptions and formulas to calculate equitability. And every single one of you will have a somewhat different understanding what that equitability entails. And if the equitability rests solely with best financial outcome or best service outcome for your region, we will never come to a common denominator. And that's the problem that we as staff will.
So I see Manager Wilson's hand up, then we'll come back to you, Director Watson. Amy, Amy?
Thank you. There's a couple of things that kind of fit into this that we've been working on. So the systems efficiency review study looked at the level of service across the district, and you know, you can go back to that report and see, but essentially we have relatively equitable service across between the three subregions, and there is a slightly higher level of service than other comparable regional districts. And so one of the things that staff is continuing to assess is that accessibility. And we have a few things coming up, one being looking at an hours of operation review, and the ministry hired a company called Eunomia to do an accessibility develop an accessibility standard. And so they've gone through and it had a large to do with all the EPR programs, but Recycle BC is one of those. And they're looking at like what's a reasonable travel distance to various to a deep collection location. And it's based on the different types of materials and how much you produce and maybe how hazardous they are to store and various things. And they've finished the report, they've done the consultation, they haven't yet developed their policy around it. And that we've been told will come out after the summer. And that's one thing we're waiting on this hours of operation review is to have that lens, like what's the provincial standard, and how does that fit with the level of service that we provide. Another thing that's kind of fitting into this is generally the regionalization work that Heidi's been working on. That was an outcome of that study, and we're still developing the workshop to come back. And one of the conversations is if we stay in our current structure, or if we start to consolidate some services, and recycling might be one of those. So there's with the new incentive rates and the RBC program changes, there's a lot of new things to look at and how much time the committee wants us to spend on continuing to revise this. Is we would like that direction. The last time we were took this away was we basically had no further action. So staff, unless this committee directs us to reassess this data again, we can send a letter to the city and let them know our position, and we'll wait to see if there's a response, or the committee can direct us to reassess all this data again, which impacts our work plans. And then otherwise these future programs and projects that we're working on will continue to inform this and how services are delivered in the future.
Further, Director?
Just last two comments. On this one, I really appreciate that there's actually a significant amount of work being done. The efficiencies report itself, I could read a few times. Two notes is, I think really for me the highlight is RBC's system is what's inequitable. We have to be the backbone on hauling. We are the backbone on the things not accepted at curbside. If we go down the road of piecemealing equitability based on costing, it would only set the precedent to then do it on servicing. And if that's the case, you're going to see the areas that pay for things like organics and household hazardous waste that don't actually have access to those servicing, then asking to be removed from those services. So I think we either are all as one, which I actually think would be the more advantageous approach to take, which is we manage all the contracts for recycling, and then everybody is equitably paying for the services that are required. I think this road will get us down to an overly complex financial and equitable issue that is only going to get more complicated. I understand where the city of Nelson is coming from, and I think there's a lot we fund that is accessible by City of Nelson residents that my residents have no access to, and we do that because recycling and all of this is important.
So I'm going to ask Stuart a question in a second. I guess the first thing I'm going to say is that and I have you, Director Page. If we had Tom Doolin here, he could talk about transit, and this is where alternate Director Woodward is quite familiar. When we really start looking at access and equitability in our transit system, we want to do that to waste management. That's kind of almost what I would see, and I know Tom Doolin spends, I know he spends months out of the year probably trying to sort through that. The question to you, Stuart, because I hadn't realized initially that we actually have two of our colleagues. We have Councillor Payne online, and of course we have alternate Director Woodward in the room. I wasn't going to offer freedom of the floor because the sitting directors here, even though they're changing. Freedom of the floor would be appropriate for both, would it not?
Yeah, the building committee, they're both elected, so it's fine.
Yeah, okay. So would we want to offer freedom of the floor for the two councillors from Nelson, moved and seconded, all in favor? Anybody opposed? Okay, so because this strikes close to home, and out of this, I think all we're probably going to get is a recap of staff's points they made today verbally in writing. Director Page.
Sure. So I think as is noted by the presence of my colleagues, this is an important issue for the City of Nelson Council and one they're looking for, we're looking for some resolution. The things I would say, and I appreciate the additional modeling, the additional costs, the updated costs from 2023, I believe is what we've got in Appendix B, is whether the policy piece is we're going to define that we're carrying costs, they're standing, going by volume doesn't make sense, whether that's the policy, or the policy is this breakdown on how we differentiate between volumes when and where and hauling when and where. And how the recycled RBC credit is applied when and where. Those are two policy directions, and this table had made that decision back in 2020 to develop some policy to lay down, because we've got the RBCK and its other organizations within the Federation that are delivering these curbside programs. So I think it's still a choice here to nail that down to some policy work, whether it's a complicated formula or a non-complicated formula. I think that's what the city needs to see on the long term, is it's going to remove the uncertainty as the model continues to change. If that becomes the position for that policy, then that's clearly what the answer is. And obviously, we could make a choice to go no further action and send a letter saying we decided no further action, which is then still policy, but now policy never written down. And I can't necessarily say that in 3 or 4 years it won't rear its head back up in some manner. So I do wonder, to staff's question about workloads, if it is beyond the veil to figure out how to write this down onto a piece of paper that this entity then approves and the board adopts, and that becomes the policy with the additional feedback going to the city of these new models, things to be considered.
From staff's perspective, it would be very beneficial to have a clear direction how we go forward. We have certainly, and I appreciate the time that the City of Nelson staff has spent on this as well, but our staff as well, on coming up with a fair formula, making certain assumptions for certain calculation basis, having a policy that clearly outlines what to do, no matter what the outcome is, would help us likely in going forward and just saying, here, this is what it is, that was your decision to agree to this policy, no matter what the outcome for the individual area or municipality is.
So I'm thinking if we ask staff to identify, make sure that there is a policy gap that needs to be filled. And then write that could end up being months away. So I would maybe hope that if the group agrees that we would ask first staff to write down what their concerns and issues are about so much of the costing is dependent upon fluid items like RBC's contribution, or what the province tells the various producers to do, or what they tell us to do. So if you could capture that, that would be good. And then I guess before you just say write a policy, I'd kind of like to know what other policy do we have that maybe this could just be an amendment. Do we have some other policies bring that back to joint as opposed to just starting to write a standalone policy. Because we've made other decisions, maybe none of it's in policy, but I'd like to know where we are and what the gap is before you start writing a standalone response to City of Nelson. I think that'd be more fair. City Manager Wilson and then Locker and Watson as well or not?
No, I was just letting
Okay,
you know.
I did see it. And, Amy, please go ahead.
Thank you. And maybe this will be corporate admin that can share some insights here, but are we looking at a policy that would impact how the bylaw is applied or a pilot, like the policy? I'm not really sure how a policy will work with the way that the bylaw is set up as a shared service. So can we develop a policy that modifies that shared service approach? I guess that clarity. And then another consideration is we can reduce some of the costs at the depot to have that. So maybe we look at reducing the hours of operation at both of the depots or the Lakeside Depot. Also, when Lakeside, our intention is Lakeside and Groman will be a combined depot as early as next year. So that again will greatly affect sort of the cost share here.
Stuart, you had some thoughts?
Through the chair, I wouldn't recommend a change to the bylaw. Just because amending bylaws is so difficult to do, and it's a little bit of a pain to do that, especially if, based on what Uli had said, this is in flux with the changing RBC rebates and things that we might have to be having moving targets. So I would say that you want to draft a policy on that, and it could include anything and everything. It could include everything from, the committee's perfectly fine with the cost share right now, but we want to revisit it every 2 years, 3 years. It could be a flat contribution for 2 or 3 years and then revisit it again to see how that lines up with whatever methodology you've agreed upon should be in calculation. And I think that's the key point, is which costs are included here and how do we track those costs, because that's what staff time gets spent. Right? The more complicated that is, the more it involves surveys or separation of streams.
Yeah.
That's where you're gonna get into spending a good portion of the costs we're trying to calculate on calculating the costs, and at what point does that just become a muddled calculation that's not worth doing? So I think the policy is the best way to go, but I think we would need a significant amount of direction as to what the committee wanted to see as part of that policy, at least in a general sense, to bring something back so you could take a first look at it.
Okay, Lockwood and Watson.
Thank you. Through the chair to, I'm not sure where this is going. Because that's where I was wondering is like, how do we have this bylaw? I understand what we're talking about, wanting a policy, but is it just to be able to put the crutch of what we do in the bylaw in the policy? Because I would like to see that inequities are in that policy, as we are a community of Samoan Area G that gave up hazard waste to be able to allow it to happen in Caswell and Area D to not affect the whole, to be able to, because we are 30 minutes away. We are not 5 minutes away from a hazard waste. We have to carry that, where that's a something that Nelson is able to get rid of daily if they wanted to, Monday to Friday, or weekends, I don't know. So is that something that we put into the policy also? Because I only can access the dump on Monday and Wednesday. Castlegar can access their dump on 5 days a week, or 6 days a week. Like how much do we put in this policy that doesn't reflect in the bylaw? And I get that in 3-4 years, it probably will come up again, but those are the kinds of things that I think that the policy is gonna have to really look at as in depth of how much do we have? Like, is this a 6-page policy? That's all I'm wondering. I don't know how you make this that it's equal for everybody in a more, I say, no, we're not gonna have hazardous waste to allow somebody that's even farther away to have it. But then we have Nelson thinking that they're paying too much for something that they have 100% access quickly to. So it's not against Nelson, it's just that's That's where I'm really wondering how big this policy is gonna be. So, through to who?
Through the chair, if I might, I guess this is part of the concern about the can of worms I was talking about, because, you know, are we gonna have to redo this for Caslow and for Selmo? And I'm concerned, this is a shared service and we have, you know, varying levels of service, but, you know, the further you get away from the centers, that makes sense. But, you know, that developing a policy to continue to reassess a shared service, I don't know where that gets us in the end. I feel like we either have to just recognize it's a shared service and we need these services, like Nelson needs a depot for the non-curbside materials, as do our rural residents, and we share that. Or, you know, like Director Lockwood just said, like where would we'd have to have policy after policy after policy to consider all these things. And then what happens if in our latest calculations, Nelson's actually maybe underpaying. So is the city of Nelson, is that retroactive? And I, you know, again, this is like, I'll go back to it. In staff's opinion, it's a shared service and we try really hard to have fair levels of service at the various locations. And I think that controlling costs at those locations is a great way to make it, you know, cost effective for all residents.
And I just want to point out a couple of occasions where we have seen great cooperation from some of the directors in order to curb cost. We had cooperation in regards to closure of the Silverton Recycling Center. We had cooperation in regards to closing the Kokanee Park. We had on the Eastern Sub-region right from the get-go, closure of several locations.
Great Creek Crocker Bay store and this one.
Recognizing that it is one sub-region that all benefit if we
Winlaw.
and Winlaw, thank you, and recognizing that we have a joint service and that we all need to find reasonable application of service levels and cost, or under consideration of cost. And so I think whatever we do should not stand in the way in the future to make decisions that help us to have a viable, reasonable service under full economic considerations. And for that reason, I would envision that the policy would be only an extension of the bylaw, really only explaining how cost is distributed and why, without coming up with distribution formulas that we are plugging in for individual areas. If that's not the intention of the bylaw, then we as staff would need a lot more clear, concise direction, what you would like to see out of the bylaw.
Out of a policy.
Sorry.
And the policy would then be more of a narrative. Maybe I'll move along the first time Director Schmidt and then back to Washington. Go ahead, please. And then Woodward, so Schmidt, Watson, Woodward, or Woodward, Watson. Director Schmidt.
The question, more comment, and that is, this isn't a can of worms, this is a dump truck full of worms.
Oh, that's my job, Dan. Give me a sir.
Unless we approach this at an extremely high level, 20,000 feet or so, we're gonna be at this for a long time, because I know my residents in Area E also have particular issues, and are we gonna cherry pick one, or are we gonna look at them all now? Because, you know, that's where this is gonna go. It's not gonna be, my personal opinion is, it's not gonna be one issue that we have to open this can of worms. It's gonna be a myriad of issues.
Okay, thank you for the first time. Councillor Woodward, then Watson and Page for second times. Go ahead, please.
Thank you.
Alternate Director Woodward.
Thank you for having me here.
So I'm rather news, I've seen this on
Oh, if you could get that, device, the owl doesn't pick up voices, but you cannot vote, sir. No, this device doesn't work very well 20 feet back.
So just sitting here listening, it feels like to me that this is kind of one of those arguments or one of the discussions that is around a more broad view approach, or I think the city of Nelson is trying to approach this more in a fine grained approach. And this seems to be the discussion as far as I'm hearing here. So broad view or fine grained. And fine grained approaches are definitely more complicated to get to an endpoint, but equity or feeling of equitable position can be achieved, I think, through that because the data is there and it's very fine grained. What I'm hearing is this more broad approach leaves a lot of wiggle room and a lot of sort of uncertainty around who pays what and is it equitable. So I guess my tossing my hat out in the ring here would be that I see value in having a fine grained approach because it does enables us to look at the data and say, here's the actual data, and let's go from that. And then with citizens out there, we can say we made this decision because of this fine grained data showed. So it seems like we're picking from a bunch of different buckets of larger scope data that can be interpreted in multiple ways, which leaves a lot of room for uncertainty. So I would just say that I would, when I sit in this chair, I would like to see fine grained approach to as we move into the future, because these services are going to get more and more complicated as our region grows, and as we need to approach as a regional approach to many issues, we're going to need that fine grained data. So that's I think we can say it's a can of worms, sure, but sometimes opening that up, opening it up and actually getting in there in the long run will help us make better decisions at this table.
If I may, in regards specifically to data gathering and interpreting and analyzing, it doesn't come free. And we have had significant cost incurred to get just the little bit of data that we use for what we have here as a spreadsheet. There was a lot of time spent interviewing customers at the transfer stations or recycling depots. And anytime you take the data, it is still, unless it's fixed scale data, but anytime you do a survey, there is a granularity of that data there, right? You have to rely on people providing you the right information. You have to rely on, because you're not catching 100%, that the percentage of the residents you inquired with gave you or a representative of the percentage of all people coming there. We deal with this all the time on the waste side on a much larger scale, and we had some discussions around the table, including discussions with our directors online, for example, in regards to waste disposal scaled versus volume estimates at our sites. We have many sites where we do that. We have certainly a lot of discrepancy sometimes between tonnage on scale versus volume estimate through attendant that needs to A, get the volume right, B, you still have in relation to the tonnage a lot of flux depending on what's really in that load. We live with that. Yes, we have discussions sometimes to adjust formulas, and we have most recently in our bylaw made adjustments to some of the volumes versus weight ratio that we are using. But we live with that granularity because we know it would be a lot more expensive to have a scale at every site, a scale attendant at every site, and it would by far exceed the financial losses we may or may not have from weight estimation. And my argument would be that this is the same here. Overall, it is cheaper for everyone not trying to create exact granular data, interpret it, analyze it, and bill separately based on that data that was generated. I think it is in everyone's advantage, because ultimately where it leads to is that we will have to have the staffing both on our sites and in the office to support getting and analyzing that data.
Supplemental?
Thank you. So I guess just thinking of my city experience is that that is cost benefit on getting fine grained data or is it granular data that's larger, a larger yeah, macro or micro. I just would say that generally when we get down to micro data, then we can actually point, this is what's happening, and then the arguments become, or the discussions become less kind of fraught because it's there. So I would say there's a cost benefit there is to actually getting that data that actually has value as we move forward into the future, because then we aren't swirling around in these discussions over and over again about equity. So I think there is, it's maybe not easy to say that the value is there immediately, but in the long term, I think that value will show itself for better policy and decision making. But you're right. I mean, it does cost more upfront, but it could head off long discussions and issues later.
So I'm hoping if the direction of staff becomes do the bullet point summary of the complications, we'll see the pros and cons and how many granular analyses we might do in order to achieve equity across 186, 187, 188,
right.
Allocation service, say 111, whatever they are. If we park that for a moment, I want to just go back through the speakers list. So for the first time, I have Maine and then Houghton, and then the second time back to Watson and Page. Director Maine.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for your comments. It's obviously a really complicated situation to deal with. One of the things that strikes me about this item and this discussion, and I'm going to draw a parallel to what I and Director Hewitt often deal with at FCM, is urban versus rural. We have Nelson, which is our urban component, claiming that they are overpaying compared to the rural areas. But we see things differently. And this also refers back to what Chair Jackman said about calling Tom Doolin in to do the complex analysis of Rancid, which he has done 3 separate times in the time that I've been on this board. You have to, we all need to accept that there are similarities and differences in what the services are that we can provide and how we can provide them. I would suggest that a merged approach makes sense. What are the fixed costs? And we just do that. Everybody pays the same amount for the fixed costs in the entire regional district. And then you look at what are the differences, what service levels are, what the financial impacts of that are. And again, you're just getting back into that incredibly complex and detailed and granular data collection that, are we going to wind up having to hire another person to do that? So we have to mix in a healthy dose of, hey, we're going to get it as close as we can, and it's not going to be perfect, and we all bloody well will live with it. I mean, Silverton gave up their recycling depot, and now we have to drive to New Denver, and instead of having it 5 days a week, we only have it 3 days a week. What does that matter? we can recycle our stuff. It's just, the complexity of it gets ridiculous after a certain point. And I think that we all need to take a little step back and go, there are fixed costs we all have to share in. And then we can look at the differences and similarities and come up with a by guess and by gosh method of calculating it that can be written as a policy. I'm not saying, just wing it completely, but let's not go to the level of detail of that we're asking for here, that we're talking about here. And that's my contribution.
Thank you. Go to Director Houghton online.
Thank you. And thank you, Director Mean. I think I'm actually just going to ask a supplemental question to what you just stated, or maybe for clarification. Currently, are we taxing, or is the cost equal across the board, or is the city of Nelson paying a higher rate? I don't think that I was clear on that, and I appreciate at the beginning you shared two ways to look at this, and I just want to know, what are we currently doing versus the two different ways, tonnage versus people traffic? Thank you.
Uli, there's here's the user fee and then transfer from other, if you want to break it down.
So the cost allocation for recycling specifically, but as well for half of the waste services, is based on assessed value. The per thousand rate is equal between all participants. There is somewhat a different in assessed values, properties depending where they are. But I believe the assessed value is recovered from the city of Nelson as one package and then individually allocated within the city using their own formula, if I recall correctly. But generally speaking, the assessment value, the cost per thousand, is for all areas the same.
And you have a revenue stream of incentives.
Yeah.
So the harder any community.
Sorry, I should correct myself. Per sub-region, every sub-region has their individual per thousand assessment.
Supplemental, Director Hope? No, okay, I'm sorry. Okay, second time, Watson and then Page, please go ahead.
Yeah, just to Director Houghton, the rate in Central Resource is 39 cents a thousand. So that's what Central pays, all participants, same rate. What I wanted to suggest in terms of a policy moving forward, I think there's two pieces that should be completed before we move to a policy, because they're going to affect the policy. The first one is the regionalization review. In all honesty, I'm going to be the one that never liked regionalization, that now that I participate in the funding of an organics program I can't access and the household hazardous waste, I'm convinced regionalization is good, and eventually Mayor Hewitt and I will benefit from those services. We know we will. I think the regionalization approach is where you get equity, because you design your system and the costing around it as an equal opportunity for every participant as much as possible. So that process would feed into or change a policy we designed right now. The other one is the closure of Lakeside. The last time I looked, the cost of Lakeside was close to what Nelson was paying in recycling. And so I thought, when I originally looked at it, it was when the city first asked questions or proposed a motion to change that. And I looked at the costing, and it was very similar in price and what they were paying versus what the cost of operating Lakeside was. If we were to move forward on any kind of changes, we could not do this only for the city of Nelson. It would not be fair. We would have to do it for all municipalities that have curbside, which gets into a level of detail where I can understand granularity being really important. Probably not the right word again. I'll get a definition later. The only way, because of the diversity and access to servicing and how, like I said, I just went to Groman because that was where I could go with the items I had. I live in Caslow. Sorry, Mayor Hewitt, I did not use the curbside program because I had to go to a depot. And the only way we would ever be accurate in those actual costs, if that's the road we're going down, is we would have to individually track each person going to each site. because everyone's going to all sites depending on where they are and what they're using. Again, I go to the depot quite often because it's easier than separating my recycling. Otherwise, it's always subjective and always up for debate if it's fair. And so I think what we're doing is we're going down a road that's going to further make it complicated and never be equal. Or we look at regionalization. So my final question is, does the regionalization work that is being done by staff include the option of acquiring municipal contracts? So we are all one, legitimately all one. And the rebates we get are shared amongst, well, they currently are, the rebates we get are shared with the city of Nelson.
I don't believe it does. Yeah, and that opens, I think, a very individual discussion alone about that one item, right? It is, as the representatives from the city of Nelson probably can contest to, the curbside program in the city of Nelson and probably in other municipalities is certainly not a simple undertaking. Has its own complexities, and it would mean clearly significantly staffing up for that, because you need somebody for the communications, managing the infrastructure. You need trucks, or you can contract it out. It's a bigger discussion. It should be go in that direction. Currently, I do not believe, and Amy, correct me if I'm wrong, currently does not include that consideration.
Through the chair, it doesn't include taking on curbside programs. It does consider recycling though, and whether it would make sense to consolidate even a district-wide recycling service, largely because it's all funded and the logistics done through a provincial program, and everybody has the same level of service from Recycle BC, same incentives and that kind of thing. It's each of the municipalities has an agreement with Recycle BC, and some of them use in-house services and some contracted and have signed contracts. So taking over those programs would be complicated. The thing that gets tricky too is that the curbside programs are based on a per household rate, and it doesn't have any impact with the amount of tonnage. You get the same annual household rate, regardless of the material that comes through. So Recycle BC really actually wants us to use our depots, municipalities to use their curbside programs as much as possible, because then if they pay the cities to host those curbside programs, but residents also bring the materials down to our depot, they're essentially paying twice for that same material, because they would pay the flat rate to the municipality, and then they would pay us an incentive rate. And we actually would like the municipalities to use their curbside programs as for the curbside materials as much as possible. And anyone's open to come and use the depots for whatever material, obviously, but the more material that we get at depots, if we move up into higher classes of tonnage, it actually makes it so that we make less, and we could be making a lower incentive rate. So having materials that aren't targeted for depots could have a detrimental impact to the overall budget for that program.
Thank you. Yeah, Hewitt, and just one last comment.
Yeah, so go ahead, and Hewitt, then Paige.
Yeah. Just to note that the material itself is one system designed by RBC. The governance is what's complicated.
Okay, so I'm just gonna note, kind of at an hour, not a bad time to note it. We have 4 main topics today. This morning, in 3 hours and 19 minutes, we covered 16 topics with 8 in-person delegations plus a closed meeting. So this is a good conversation, but we will not solve this today. I hope we'll at least get either staff telling us how they're going to respond to the city initially, and then down the road, what may or may not come out of policy. Director Hewitt for the first time, then Paige.
Thank you, and I hope that comment about taking a short time wasn't directed at me.
Absolutely.
I know it wasn't. Thank you.
I just wanted to put in perspective, we have an agenda that permits a bit of conversation today. If it was this morning and I chaired this morning, we wouldn't be having this conversation. However, please absolutely go ahead. Your input is valued, Director Hewitt.
All right, I will be brief. I agree that if we're going to look at one, we should look at all, and there are differences between each of the curbside collection communities. And I think our CAO has been talking to RDCK staff about a complication that we've run into, and it's something that's been created by Recycle BC. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. Director Page, maybe you'll close off our conversation for the day.
I'd be happy to. So just reiterating a few points around the table. I think when we're talking about policy development, we're talking about those municipalities that pick up. Like we that have pickup, that's a driving cost. It's distinctly different than what's going on in a rural area in terms of equity, because we have to staff and trucks and everything that goes around with that component of the system. So I think that's where we're drawing a box around the policy, is what does it come back to when arriving at these costs, and that's why it does come up, because we have these costs and we're trying to figure out how to provide that level of service. The other thing I just hang a flag on is the conversation around how great the service is here in Nelson because of our locality to how we're delivering that. It's a bit of a first agent problem in the sense that we at this regional district level have decided on where certain things are, and we're in different stages of decommissioning and consolidating and regionalizing. Those costs are present here. They may not be forever, but contemplation of 3 or 4 losing a day might be something in the cards if the city of Nelson is actually running the service. And so I think it's why we want to get down to a narrative policy, as has been suggested, where we're describing and laying it down and providing this feedback loop and closing the loop on this particular topic as to why we arrive at these numbers and what the rationale is for how we're doing this conversation, nailing that down. I think if we can do that, then half the council almost has heard this part of the conversation, but I know it's going to necessitate something written down. And I think a letter is a start. But I think a narrative policy for both ourselves and future board members, future council terms that says this is what we've arrived at, this is how we spit a number out. And myself, I am comfortable if we've nailed down fair principles that are being evenly applied to that curbside piece for those other municipalities, that sometimes the numbers will come out in our favor because the principles can break down in a fair manner, and other pieces will continue to move. RBC will increase, and someday perhaps potentially with another government decrease incentives, and then there'll be impacts. But if we lay down the policy work, it'll give us something to build a future debate about 10 years from now. But there was conversation about how do we refresh? Is that a 3-year window? Is that a 5-year window? Is that a 2-year window? Nobody wants us to be spending hundreds of dollars to find out how we save 3 for someone else. Yeah. So,
Thank you. So I need to do a little bit of a process piece, because this letter was written to the chair of Central Resource Recovery, who's not in the room today. He could not be in the room today, family issues or personal issues, which is quite fair. Process wise, I think the information we received verbally as a committee would be best summarized by staff as a staff response, or if this is from Mayor Morrison, does this become a board response? In which case, direction to staff would be to prepare a letter for Board Chair Watson to respond to Mayor Morrison. Thoughts on process? Because to me, it's a little inappropriate to have this letter to the chair of Central Resource. Staff to draft the letter?
I would suggest it's a staff, even though it came from the political end. I think the detail and the level of detail at this point is the direction of staff.
Staff to staff.
Yeah.
Everyone's comfortable with that? Direction to staff? Okay, I'm just looking for a bit of a nod. Yes, thank you, Vandenberg.
I guess I'm not really clear as to what the outcome is here. What has been what do we glean from this conversation? My question, the staff has got to be now, what is the efficiency and the cost savings in addressing a policy around a conversation that I'm not even clear the direction is forward? And I just want to ask staff, explain to me what it is that we're supposed to do, that you're supposed to do now.
Well, I thought it was just the other way around, but,
Well, maybe I will say, I think what we're formulating is a direction to staff to provide the information, the point form information that would need be that we receive this committee. As staff, provide that to City of Nelson staff, step one. So,
and
Leah might,
and I think that's correct. And the benefit we are hoping to get from this is that we have all sides at a point where they say, okay, this is the policy, this should end the ongoing discussions. There's clear direction to staff. From here on in, this is how we address equitability or perceived equitability in the future. And again, from my perspective, I don't see it as coming back with all kinds of complicated formula to calculate something, but to reiterate the general setup as a joint service and the equitabilities, if you want so, or the way by how we financially sustain that as it was set up in the original bylaw and how it applies accordingly to this service. That's what I would envision the policy looks like.
but this would be two steps. I think we're talking about, someone
Amanda?
should respond to Mayor Morrison.
Yes.
So if you're staff to staff, respond not to the mayor, respond to their staff, saying, here's the points discussed and the relevant issues that would need to be used to formulate a narrative, which is in fact becomes a policy. Would that be step one? Respond to the city.
Yes, but do you expect then to a response from the city that forms the basis for the policy, or is it just to inform the city and we as staff then bring forward a policy?
Correct. I think it'd be nice to acknowledge the mayor's letter, tell them that we've had a conversation. It's much more than necessarily one item in the view of the committee, and perhaps that'll be the view of the board. It's maybe more than one item. And then if we do evolve a policy, which was staff's responsibility, it's regional policy, that it will involve more than one item. It will involve the complexity. So further, Director?
Thank you for that. That's a little bit of clarity, but I will also express my concern with the next step forward, taking staff time. I mean, I understand that this is S-187, it's your backyard, I get that. But you're asking our staff to invest a bunch of time into the opportunity of a policy that I don't necessarily agree with right now. So I just want to point that out.
Okay.
Because
thanks.
staff time is my time too. Is that everybody's time?
Yeah, so I expect if a policy development goes in a work plan, staff will let us know when that'll happen based on what else they're doing tomorrow, the next day. I don't know if we captured Nancy or Emma. We lost Director Davidoff.
Yeah.
Thank you. I apologize, Director Davidoff, if I was aware. We could have paused the meeting and maybe I missed an email. So we're good with the first step. Alternate Director Woodward. Clarification on direction to staff.
I think what I think is really important is that staff, our RD staff and city staff agree on the foundation data. That it's going to be that there's this level of data that everyone agrees on, and then we're going to move from there forward rather than having like the city's calculations and the RD calculations and they're not lining up, so something's off. So it seems that there needs to be a level playing field, staff to staff, and that the equity issue is challenging because equity is can be looked at in so many different ways. So that's why I was saying that fine grained data would kind of move that aside and say, well, this is the data. But I understand the challenge getting there. But I definitely feel like staff to staff need a decision on the foundation of where you're building from, that we can head off future issues around this.
We are going to move on from this item really soon. I don't know if Director Popoff needs to speak or not, but I guess what I'm going to suggest is that our staff probably heard from this committee that they're not looking at a granular issue. They're looking at a broad-based narrative that'll form a policy, which will involve perhaps 20 factors. I don't know. I'm gonna wait for staff to do that. I'm not expecting staff, based on what I've heard here, to do a singular policy on one granular item. If I'm wrong, you guys will tell me. Can we move on?
Just a comment.
Please, Director
You know,
Paul.
But when we look at it, we look at every level of service, et cetera, of the whole thing completely, not just one or two items. That's my thought.
So staff will let us know just how complex that is. There's gonna be a short-term response to the city, I hope, and then we're gonna have a further conversation about just how complex that will be, and do we see that this year or next year, which we're. And Amy Wilson had a question.
Yeah, before we go to Amy, I feel I heard in the last two comments something that is very different than what you as chair formulated as direction to staff. So, detailed evaluation of service levels and cost, discussion with the city staff about the approach here is different from what I believe I heard from the chair saying a broad-based principles for the formulated within the policy. So I'm a bit confused now. What the direction to staff is?
Clarity wise, my understanding, the direction of staff is please provide a summary of this discussion and the options moving forward, which is why it was a staff to staff and not a political to political. To note that that's what I've heard is we need to provide the context back to the council so everybody has it and their staff has it. That's what I had heard.
Which will necessarily be broad-based, because I heard from my peers, a lot of concerns around hazardous waste, around access to old corrugated cardboard, whatever. It is broad-based.
Chair, point of order.
We will move on. Director Davidoff,
Amy.
I see you, hey, Director Davidoff, you're seeking a point of order, then we're gonna go to Manager Wilson. Go ahead, Director Davidoff.
Yeah, I believe that what we're talking about here is a service review and not direction to staff. And I think that's why staff is confused, is that you have a partner who's.
That's not a point of order, Director Davidoff, unless I'm wrong as chair. That is an opinion. And if you want to put a motion to the chair for a joint next month about a service review, that would be one path. But that's an opinion, not a point of order.
I think that's why we have confusion on what we're doing right now. And I'm trying to bring order to the meeting.
I'm not confused, Director, whatsoever. I think staff knows what they're going to do. Can I go back to Manager Wilson? Yeah, I'm just saying, Director, it's not a point of order. Back to Manager Wilson.
Thank you. So just to clarify, the immediate action items is we'll develop a summary of this discussion and an explanation of our approach to the data, send that to the city staff, maybe follow up with the meeting if preferred. And then I'm assuming at that point, we wait for a response from the city, whether they agree that this doesn't need to move forward or ask for further. I mean, looking at the biggest caution I would put here is the data that we're currently talking about is from 2023 with the consolidation of the depots and the new incentive rates. There's a lot more to update in this discussion if we're looking to develop more. And so like a policy or just to check and see where we're at where those like over under payments land with this new information. And that's a fair amount of staff time. So at this point, I'm assuming that we're not looking at redoing this calculation or assessment until we share this information with the city and see what the next steps are. I have to admit the policy portion of this direction is still very vague to me. And I actually agree with Director Davidoff that what we're looking at here is maybe something a little bit further down that line, because this service is funded by how the service is funded is directed by a bylaw, and adding policy to it that we're looking at levels of service and funding for all the partners and things. I think that this gets quite complicated, but I think we'll have an opportunity to come back with information from the city on the next steps and maybe have a little bit more time to think about what a policy could look like, and that the committee can have some ideas and staff will consider it. But I think we would need to circle back and get a bit more clear direction on what that policy would look like and what the intentions and purposes of it are.
Thank you. Move to an item next on the agenda. 3.2, update on the fire at Cusp landfill, West Subregion. Nathan, are you, it's not the room, no. Are you online, Nathan, to give us a bit of an update, or Amy, I see your hand up, please go ahead.
Thank you. I was moving screens and I wasn't able to get back to my volume. So in the agenda, I think it's around page 20, we have a summary from Nathan on an occurrence. Actually, there was a couple of occurrences over a few days. This was in early through mid-June, where the yard and garden pile, the older yard and garden pile, began burning. And this has happened at other sites. We've had this occur at Udashenia and various things. And we try to create the stockpiles in a way where they're not too tall, because that can help to generate heat. And we have to be careful about watering, because actually adding water can increase the heat and actually have further risk of piles. So, essentially one of the reasons why we wanted to share this with you is, I won't go over all the details of the incidents, but they're in the agenda package. But just to point out the concerns that staff have with the piles of stockpiled material around at the various sites, and why we're allocating staff time and expenses to manage these piles, so that one, they're a fire risk within themselves, and also because of wildfire. And they take up space and they cause some traffic issues and such at our sites. So this is just something to point out is a risk to us, and we are trying everything we can to manage it. This fire has been managed, but I think it was just to share the liability for this at our sites, and that explain why you'll be seeing some additional budget recommendations to further manage these piles. It's also a reason why we changed, this is yard and garden obviously, but we have a lot of wood waste piles at our sites that we don't really have a beneficial purpose for. And that's why we recommended the change in the dirty wood waste classification that's now going into mixed waste, because accumulating all this material at our sites, one, has all these risks I just talked about, but it also, we incur the cost of chipping it. And so what we're doing now isn't ideal, because we don't want to be landfilling those organics, but they come at a risk to just continue to stockpile into perpetuity at our sites. So was there anything else that you wanted to discuss on that, Uli, or do you want to just open it up for questions?
No, it is really just for information that the directors are aware that these some of our struggles, they were there in the past. It's just a bit more extreme in this particular instance, but it is a concern that we have all along, and that we will need in part to address with increased hauling of these materials from our sites, less specific to Lacas, but in other locations.
Any questions for Amy or Uli on additional information on that? Chair Watson.
Just out of curiosity, I'm sure you're familiar with the fire that just came about in the Okanagan, and it was due to lithium batteries being improperly disposed of. I don't think you can catch that if they're improperly disposed of. But I'm just wondering if there's other avenues or lessons learned that should be incorporated in advance, kind of from their experience.
Grass clippings, Uli, was one we tried to isolate in the past.
Yes. Are you, sorry, is that directly referring to issues around the batteries or?
The other elements that can cause fire.
Yeah. So the batteries specifically is an ongoing and massively evolving issue in the industry. damages are estimated to be meanwhile in the billions North America wide from fires starting from battery lithium, mainly lithium batteries. That's common. Both the producers and their EPR programs try to get a handle on, the haulers try to get a handle on, and it likely requires a lot more education to the general public, and it will be a challenge for years to come. No easy solution to it. In regards to yard and garden waste, yeah, typically, as Amy already explained, small piles, not having massive amounts of green waste in one location, and generally speaking, we have in our inspection of sites that in our minds where we have additional fire risks, we have, for example, changed our practices at our landfills for increased or almost solely soil cover versus formerly wood-based cover as waste for waste cover as a material to provide fire breaks and better containment and isolation from oxygen, which feeds the fires. So we are aware of it. We have various initiatives, but it is certainly one of the bigger risks for landfills and to some degree for other waste facilities.
Further?
No.
Director Selznick.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for the update. When did this get reported? Was it in the evening that this happened?
Through the chair, I don't have that on hand. I think it was daytime when the site was open.
Okay. Just a supplemental. I did get a call from a person saying it was in the evening, in the afternoon, or after it had closed. A worker had gone and looked at it, had seen it, and called me for the fire chief, and they went up and looked at it. Is there a way, like, we have a Box Lake mill here that cuts wood, cedar, and it's a massive pile. And once a fire starts in there, it's almost impossible to get it out. So the only way to do it is, I know when you open it up, oxygen gets to it right away, and away it goes. But it travels underground and it goes all over the place. Like you can rip it apart, and you think you've got it. And 3 or 4 days later, it comes back in a different area. So is it possible to store it or spread it out more evenly so it's not in a big pile?
Uli, you're in, site constraints, I guess.
Yeah, through the chair, we NACUS specifically may have some more space. We are about to we're in the final stages of closure planning, so we don't want to move things to locations that are going to be a challenge to us for closure, to reduce risk that may be worth it. It's something we could look at. I mean, I think the intention is we normally don't pile them at a height. I can't remember there's a recommended height that we stick to, but this one, there have been a bunch of heavy rains, and this pile generated enough heat for the fire. One thing staff has been doing with the drone and software that we have is to be measuring essentially taking stock of all the piles that we have at all our sites and what their sizes and what the material types are, and develop a plan for how to do that, and whether it's moving some materials to other sites where, say, yard and garden could be used for composting or some other purpose, or direction for pile management that's different and at locations that have the space to do something like that. That's certainly something we could look at.
Further, Greg?
Just quickly, yeah. Thank you. Just forgot what I was going to say. I do know that mill up. It's not very far from me. The Box Lake Mill. It's been actually, once it starts, like this mill, even though you think you got it out a year later, it's opened up again, and yeah, once it gets started, it's just about impossible to get it out. So they did get it out, but they had to rip mountains and mountains of wood waste to get it out. So I know spreading it out more evenly on the ground, larger areas, it reduces the risk. So that's just from my experience.
And if I may, that is exactly the same risk that you have with landfills. So there's landfill fires that burn for weeks because you have to literally rip your landfill apart in order to get to the core of the fire. And so that's why prevention is so essential in regards to keeping landfills safe.
I didn't see any other questions, nobody else online. I thought we'd identified explicitly some time ago to not permit grass clippings in yard and garden. I don't see it in the current bylaw. I know we had a conversation about this some time ago. We might have had a little fire in Preston once. Is that?
Amy, can you comment?
Through the chair, we don't have any grass clippings separated. It actually is something we would like to consider at locations that we have the space, because you don't need to chip things like grass clippings and leaves, and right now it all goes into the same pile. So while it just kind of adds to the volume that goes through the material, the chipper, but a lot of locations we don't have we don't have space to have separate piles, or it goes into a bin that gets hauled, so we don't have multiple bin locations. So it is something we're considering, but it's not something we currently have separated at any of the sites or in the bylaw.
Okay, thank you. Further questions for staff on this point? Chat again. I don't see anyone else. We will go to 3.3. This is a site license agreement for Creston Car Wash Recycling Depot sub-region. Akane, you have a report for us if you want to give a bit of a summary of it, and then you have a recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Through the chair, so this report is about recycling and renewal for the Creston Car Wash Recycling Depot. So the RCK and Iron Mountain Car Wash Municipals Limited, or Iron Mountain, have been in a contract agreement since 2020 June, and we have extended the contracts 3 times already, and the last one expired on the 31st of May. So we are up for renewal. So staff approached the Iron Mountain in November last year, and Iron Mountain agreed to continue the business with us with 2% annual increase for rental expenses, rental fee. And therefore staff presented this to the East Resource Recovery Committee in December, and the resolution was approved by the board, which is stated in the report. So we were going to sit there. However, Iron Mountains reached out to me again in February for the further increase of the rental fee, because after we discussed about snow removal responsibilities, they had a misunderstanding that they only were responsible for just the clearing out the snow around the bins, but actually their responsibility also includes the hand shoveling portion of the removal. Then they declared that they'll increase the cost of their labor, also with the inflation of the wages of the labor and cost. And also just integrate the fact that they never had a price increase for the last 5 years. So yeah, they proposed to increase the rental fee from $3,000 per month to $3,500 per month. So after that proposal was submitted, staff did a calculation. So 2025 financial plan for service 8116 allocated $39,556 towards both Ryondale and Creston Car Wash Recycling Depots lease expenses. So Ryondale's one is only $1,000 per year, which is nice. So if we do increase the price from August 1st until the rest of the year, and if that becomes $3,500, that'll bring the total to $38,500. So with that and Ryondale's expenses, that will bring up to $39,500. So that actually goes under our allocated budget for the remaining of the year. So staff really recommend to proceed with the price increase as requested for this location, because this will allow the RDCK to continue to investigate opportunities for other suited locations, or consider more cost-effective move which could be consolidating Kristen Car Wash depot with Kristen Landfill depot, or adding eco depot on the site in Kristen Landfill and make the system more cost effective in the future. So I'd love to read this long recommendations, but I don't want to, so
Okay.
make it short. So the staff recommends resolution 645/24 to be amended to read that the board approved the RDCK enter into a site license agreement with Arrow Mountain Car Wash and Mini Storage Limited for the Kristen Car Wash Recycling Depot to a maximum value of $42,000 for the period of 1 year commencing August 1st, 2025, with the option of 4 one-year extensions after mutual agreement. And further that the cost be paid from Service A116 recycling program East Sub-region, and further that the chair and corporate officer be authorized to sign the necessary documents.
Good, thanks, Akane. So, questions and or to move the recommendation, Director Vandenberg, see your hand first.
Question staff, first of all, so, thank you for the work on this, it's appropriate for sure. Now, you mentioned that, the increase, the rental had not been increased in the past 4 years, so that makes sense that it's due. Additional expenditure around, snow removal, those sorts of things, makes all sense. But my question is, who asked for the 2% annual increase to be added to that? Is that what they requested, or is that what staff offered?
Sure, go ahead, please.
So that was actually the offer from the car wash, Arrow Mountain, 2% increase was originally based on the knowledge that they don't have to do hand shoveling, and then they thought 2% annual increase will be sufficient at that point. Then after we discussed about the contract renewal and the contents of that snow removal portion of the contract, they realized that they do have to do snow shoveling more extensively, and then they kind of changed their mind that they would love to increase the price a bit further. I think by 2% increase, that was only $3,060 instead of $3,000 per month, only $60 increase per month. But then they just thought $3,500 will be more sufficient to cover the cost during the snow removal season and plant maintenance.
Further?
No, but the 2% is weird.
This was a back forth negotiation is what I'm hearing.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions for staff, or does anybody want to move the recommendation to amend it to what Patty just read? Director Lockwood.
Because there's not a motion on the table, I can bring this up, is that Salmo was sitting in the same position and has double the land and pays way less than that, so again, we're saving taxpayers' money. So I'm hoping that something like this is coming forward.
Staff is, as the report states, looking at an alternate site and or with less convenience, perhaps less accessibility. You Tom Dual to do that analysis. We have to be concerned about high volume of diversion. That's one of the goals. And then, of course, eco depot. Chair Watson.
I'll move the motion.
Move the recommendation. We have a second. Moved and seconded. Discussion on the recommendation. None online. Okay, please go ahead, Dr. Hum.
Yeah, sorry, thank you. I just wanted to clarify, it's a significant difference in pricing. And so curious if Arrow Mountain is providing all the staff hours as well and paying those wages for the staff that are working there versus, say, up in Ryandale where there's a society that is providing the property. So just clarifying that.
No, they do not, through the chair, do not provide the staffing at the facility. What they provide is snow clearing and other minor maintenance of the site, but not the staffing of the facility.
Yeah.
Further?
Just that it's a high cost. And $500 extra a month is a high cost for we don't get a lot of snow here in Creston, so that is a significant increase to cover snow removal. that they didn't realize they were responsible for anyways.
Thanks noted.
Yeah.
Hence the 1-year renewal and investigation of a few different options. Further discussion on the recommendation? Seeing none, all in favor? This is being committee, all votes, I guess. Any opposed? So seeing none, that is carried. We'll go to board tomorrow. Item 3.4, similar but different. Yes, I did the square footage and rental calculation when I looked at this one. So this is Crescent Valley Recycling Depot site license agreement. Bakani, please go ahead.
Site license agreement for the Crescent Valley Recycling Depot is the topic of this report. So the RDCK and the Crescent Valley Community Depot Society, or I'll call it Society, entered into an agreement to lease the land from the society since 2020 June as well. And we did 3 extensions after that, and we're on the last term, which expired on the 31st of May. So we are currently on a short-term contract extension until we solve this problem. So then staff reached out to the society to confirm their willingness to continue the business with us, and they did agree. However, they again proposed the increase in the rent. So currently we're paying $700 per month. However, they are now asking for $1,000 per month as of August 1st. And also, I'd like to note that same as the Kristen Car Wash situation, both our Mountain and society are not able to provide their own legal review template. Therefore, the RDCK corporate admin team has drafted this agreement, which is attached as attachment A. So going forward, it's no longer a lease agreement, it's called site license agreement. And so because of the proposal of rental increase, staff did assessment on this. So the 2025 financial plan for service A118 allocated $8,400 towards the rental expenses for this particular depot. And as table 1 shows, if we are to increase the rental fee for this as of August 1st, the total will be up to $9,900, which is $1,500 over, unfortunately. However, staff do recommend direct award the site license agreement to society with a rental increase to secure this location, because the staff is concerned that if we don't do this and go through the RFP process, for example, we may not be able to find any alternative locations. In fact, there are not many locations that's available for us to have sufficient amount of land, or to have a fairly developed land that has a power line attached, which we actually installed for this site in Crescent Valley already. So we don't want to waste that or repeat the same cost. So the staff do recommend this move. And therefore, this recommendations is that the board approve the RDCK enter into a site license agreement with the Crescent Valley Community Hall Society for the Crescent Valley Recycling Depot to a maximum value of $36,000 for a 3-year period commencing August 1st, 2025, with the option of 2 1-year extensions at mutual agreement. And further that the cost be paid from service A118 recycling program waste subregion. And further that the chair and corporate officer be authorized to sign the necessary documents.
Okay, questions for staff and or anyone wanting to move the recommendation?
Yeah, question.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, and then to the chair, to staff. What is the difference to the regional district from a lease agreement to a site license agreement?
Danny, that's what corporate recommends.
Yes, through the chair, I think you'd have to ask corporate admin. I don't know that we got that direction.
Something to bring back for general information, I guess, later.
And for one of the reasons, if I may supplement the chair, is one of the reasons for that, I do recall there was an incident at that location where a person broke their foot or something to that extent, and we were basically taken to, we were included in that. So
would, a site license agreement prevent us from being included in any incident there? That would be the question that I would ask.
We will answer that. I don't think it will make a difference in that regard. I mean, it comes ultimately down to the wording. It comes down to who does snow removal. Did we fulfill our role to check that the snow removal was done appropriately? Does it have anything to do with the hauler on site and any neglect from their side? So there's a lot of questions that would need to be answered, but generally speaking, these two should be equivalent agreements, and then explicit wording that may have changed since that, I don't know.
They are shared use sites, and maybe we could, at least the access is shared use, maybe that's part of it. Director Lockwood.
Thank you. Through the chair, so in this report, it states that, that we elected to remove the Winlaw Recycling Depot in March of 2025. Here we're now July, and now we're talking about an increase. And I'm sure that I heard one of the, directors online call out that Winlaw was one of them that was being closed. So I'm really confused here. It says in the report that we were closing it. We elected to remove it, but now we're going for an increase?
This is Crescent Valley, don't?
This is Crescent.
Am I in the wrong one?
It's Crescent Valley Depot that we are extending or renewing the contract. Winlaw has been closed. We just recently, I think, have removed the last of the assets from there. And after that, we will no longer lease that site.
Okay, it's just that that's in this report, so that's why I was confused.
It'll shift to here now, I guess, that point.
It's,
yeah.
Okay.
Further questions, recommendation?
I will move the recommendation, but I'd like to ask a question after.
Absolutely moved by Director Popoff, the second paragraph discussion on the recommendation.
So the question would be is, with the option of 3 more years of extensions at $1,000?
300 per month.
There is CPI clause in there.
Oh, sorry.
The chair, we did not include the CPI increase review clause in this site license agreement as of now. Probably, I don't know if they really suggest that, we might look into that and come back to the committee.
So as supplemental, if I may, like the last agreement was in 2020. With the option to renew for 3 years, and that was at $700 a month. And I'm just wondering if it's the same thing for this new agreement.
Anytime we have a renewal of an agreement, it's a mutual agreement, and that allows the site holder to say, by the way, I would love to have 2% more. So it is fixed with the CPI clause for the duration of the main contract. The extensions allow variations to the agreement.
Thank you.
If it's a significant variation, we would bring it back for approval.
I'm gonna go to Director Vandenberg. You might be wanting to ask what I want to ask now. Go ahead, Director.
So this is coming up a little bit more frequently, I see. We're talking about commercial agreements, whether it be leased and that sort of thing. A commercial agreement has nothing to do with labor policy. CPI is more tied to employees type of labor. We have to stop assuming that with commercial agreements, that there is a CPI, a 2% increase. No, it's negotiated through the term. It is the amount that you negotiate, either by month or by year, that is the amount and the term. CPI is more related to laborist type of staffing. And I'm seeing this popping up more often, and I'm starting to challenge it all the time. We've got to get away from that. It's a different, commercial leasing is commercial leasing and agreements. It's not the same as municipal or anything to do with the staff and employees. It's not the same thing.
Go ahead, Rudy, but does this have CPI built in?
No.
I didn't see it. It's not built.
But the previous one did.
Okay, so
it's a valid comment in regards to private corporations that we sign agreements, and we will take that under advisement going forward. I would argue when we talk with societies that it is fair to have that discussion with them if they would like that inflation adjustment, because we have had agreements where they just become outdated, and it is fair to have an adjustment, and societies are not always fully on the ball with that. Let's put it that way. But we will take that on the advisement going forward with agreements with private entities.
Chair, supplemental, if I might, and to follow along Director Vanderberg's, and this is the question why I asked a lease agreement and the difference between a site license agreement. And that was because of CPI. And that would have been, is there any difference between one or the other? And my assumption was that because we're going into a site lease agreement, that there should not be any CPI.
I don't think that makes a difference. I can think you can have both in both.
Okay, so this is fixed amount 3 years. Further discussion on the recommendation.
Amy has a
And,
comment.
oh, sorry, we'll go to Manager Wilson and Director Schmidt. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Just on the CPI, on some of our contracts, we reference that, but there's the contract itself that specifically identifies that we use the transportation index. So it's something that's more fuel based. And because I don't know what the rest of the contracts that you're seeing CPI on what their scope is, but we use we might reference it as CPI, but it's more of just an inflationary increase. And so these ones in particular, they don't have staffing and those kinds of things, but they would have insurance increases and other things like that. So it's something maybe we'll just be more careful with what we're calling it, and try and be continue to be specific on things we can see increases in, and not just use a general CPI application if something is more applicable. So thanks for pointing that out.
Director Schmidt.
We don't have any leases at all that don't include a CPI, and also another term that says any increases. We don't take any decreases. That happens as well.
Interesting. Seeing no further discussion, nobody online, nobody in chat, all in favor? Any opposed? That is carried and goes to board tomorrow. Just before public time, we will go to at 2:48. Back, who have we got online? So anybody online, there is no public in the room. Anyone online who wishes to ask a question of this committee, I see there's somebody designated as Bob, there may be others. Anybody with a question, I'll give you a minute to unmute and ask the question. Not hearing any, not seeing anything, we will move along. So I want to thank, just before we adjourn, we were able to have a 1-hour conversation on something that is germane to this massive expense, resource recovery, multi-million-dollar annual expense on our taxpayers. So it was nice that we had time to have that conversation. Thanks for all. But entertain a motion to adjourn at 2:49. So moved, seconded, without objection, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
So when did I tell Christine I would answer that? 30 minutes?